Thank you so much, Nirmit. It is amazing to be here today as I watch all of you coming together to shape a more powerful future for all at the Asia Pacific Innovation Challenge. I can tell you from my experience as a journalist and speaker, the most important question that you will ever be asked is one that is going to come up time and time again. Who do you think you are? My family migrated to Australia from the Middle East when I was 8 years old. And, like any kid, all I wanted was just to fit in. And as you can see from the photo, I really did it seamlessly. I bet you can't even spot me in that photo. Of course, when you land in a totally different country and culture, all you want is to feel like you belong. But when you have a weird name that no one can pronounce and you have big hair, a big nose, and you're a total nerd, the only way that people see you is strange and different. I remember being at university like you when one morning before going into class, I was getting ready and I ran past the TV to get breakfast when I saw, in utter shock and disbelief, planes flying into the World Trade Center in New York as the events of September 11 played on repeat. As a young Arab Australian Muslim woman who also wore the hijab at the time, I knew that my life would never be the same again. It was 2001, and just a couple of years before that, I had left my lifelong dream of becoming a fashion designer to study sociology and social policy. Why? Because as a visibly Muslim woman, I experienced firsthand the fear, discrimination, and the destructive stereotypes that wider society leveled against Muslims, and I wanted to do something about it. In the media, no one looked like me at the time or had an Arab name. And worse still, if they were Arabs or Muslims, they were only ever portrayed as terrorists and criminals, both in Hollywood and in real life. More importantly, Muslims were never depicted as though they were part of anything that wasn't an extremist group. We never saw them as they really are, an incredibly diverse and dynamic group of 1.6 billion people united by faith, who have been pivotal in shaping both East and West for centuries. Arab and Muslim women were always seen as weak, invisible, oppressed, and powerless. The complete opposite of every Muslim woman that I had ever known. The women that I knew were active leaders who drew inspiration from Islamic tradition that was rich with powerful female icons, all the way back to the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. I remember hearing the story of Khadija, a successful businesswoman in her own right, who at the age of 40, she proposed to the Prophet Muhammad when he was 25, becoming an incredible partner in support to him. He loved her for a quarter of a century until she passed away. And even after that, the Prophet always sent food and gifts to her family and friends in honor of her. Her story is just one of many. But as September 11 hit, that critical moment in history became a turning point that would change my life. Muslim women, especially those who wear the hijab, were now easy targets, facing a surge in hate crimes. They were attacked, they had abuse hurled at them, they had their scarves ripped off their heads, and at the very least, many were denied job opportunities because of the way that they looked. Many were forced to choose between being Australian or Muslim, as if it was impossible for the two to coexist. And I had to wonder, why was all of this happening? And I realized that when we feel threatened, our response is to look for a common enemy. We already looked foreign, and with the frenzy of fear that was now being stirred up by sensational media headlines, we were now literally seen as the enemy. This is when I realized that owning your story and telling it your way is the most powerful thing that you can do, because you get to define who you are before anyone else can. There are two parts to diversity and inclusion. We have to be willing to use our voices in order to drive change, and the rest of us need to be active listeners who can be part of the transformation process. Because it's really important to realize that the strongest force in the human personality is the need to remain consistent with how we define ourselves. So if we don't take ownership of our own story and tell it on our own terms, then we're going to become defined by the limitations that others impose on us. And that is where you need to ask yourself, before anyone else does, who do you think you are? I had a mentor who recognized that I had a talent as a communicator and a public speaker. And she saw my potential before even I could. I never thought about going into radio, but she saw me as a young woman who could move the world with her voice. And it was through her encouragement that I accidentally became a radio presenter. It was the first time that I was able to tell my story in all its depth and beauty as a young Arab Australian Muslim woman who was also a radio presenter, a designer, an artist, an entrepreneur, a community development worker, a youth leader, as well as a powerful voice for change. We created shows that broke down negative stereotypes and that spoke to a whole new generation who were proud of their heritage, but who were now also playing a central role in shaping Australia's future. I was honored to be able to help many more tell their stories, as well as training other young people to become presenters and producers themselves. This became part of a wider movement across the country and across the world, where Muslims were now finally starting to emerge as leading figures in popular culture, in media, sports, entertainment, the arts, and beyond. When I was asked to give media interviews about what I was working towards, a more diverse and equitable world that included and celebrated everyone, regardless of their cultural heritage or faith, I kept coming back to this one verse from the Quran, which I really felt spoke to the power of being different. But later I realized that it actually goes so much deeper. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha, وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. O humankind, we have created you from a male and a female and made you into nations and tribes so that you may know one another. It's incredible. It says, oh, humankind. It's talking to everybody, not just Muslims. We have created you from a male and a female. It's pointing our attention in the direction of needing to see that equality between men and women. And then there's that idea that we are different because it is so that we can know one another. Now, if you and I and are going to get to know one another. What does that take? Why is it even so important, both in life and in business? For us to truly know one another, it takes us first being open with one another. It takes us approaching each other with wonder and genuine curiosity, taking the time to really listen, putting aside our ego, and dropping all judgment and preconceptions. For us to really know one another, we have to be willing to see every facet of who each of us is, making space for each other to show up completely, bringing our heritage, our culture, our faith, our food, our traditions, our dreams, our fears, our concerns, all of that. We get to know each other through our stories. I have to be willing to reach out to you and ask with empathy and compassion, what do you want? And most people will answer with one variation of the same thing. It is, in fact, to be seen and to be valued. And in telling our stories, we begin to see our commonalities as well as the strength in our diversity. And this is where we experience a concept and a consciousness that the Africans call Ubuntu. It means I am because we are. It's that understanding that your story is central to the development and the growth of others. When we know one another, especially if we seem different, we begin to see that we're actually part of one human family, like the threads of an incredible tapestry. This is when we see that honoring and elevating others is how we honor and elevate ourselves. And that is when belonging happens. It's not just nice to belong. We have a biological need for it. Whether you're that ethnic kid in an all-white school, or you're a woman of color who isn't finding the correct shade of makeup that she needs to match her skin tone, or a Muslim athlete who's being told that she cannot compete because she wears a hijab. Belonging is what helps us connect to a greater purpose as organizations and as employees. And in turn, it helps us establish a connection with our customers. The more diverse and representative your company is, the more that your customers will not only connect with you, but more importantly, they feel invested in you because you made the effort to invest in a relationship with them. It's more than just creating great products and services. When you create a truly diverse and inclusive brand, you are telling your customers that they are seen, heard, and valued. And that is worth so much more. The latest research from McKinsey reinforces the strong business case for both gender diversity and ethnic and cultural diversity in corporate leadership. And this business case only gets stronger. The most diverse companies are now more likely to outperform less diverse peers on profitability. And their 2019 analysis has found that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on executive teams were 25% more likely to have above average profitability than companies in the bottom quartile. And that's up from 21% in 2017. They also found that the greater the representation, the higher the likelihood of outperformance. Companies with more than 30% women executives were more likely to outperform companies where the percentage ranged from 10 to 30, and in turn, those companies outperformed those with even fewer female executives or none at all. In fact, the likelihood of outperformance separating the most from the least gender diverse companies is substantial. It's 48%. Now, I want to ask everybody, how many of you use Google Maps here? Type yes in the comments if you use Google Maps. Of course, today, to get around, it is almost impossible to do it without using Google Maps or other geolocation apps, right? But how many of you know that it is, in fact, a Turkish woman, Dr. Shireen Takanay, who actually pioneered the technology behind wireless geolocation? In fact, when she developed this at Bell Labs in the 1990s, she had to create a whole new job title just for her. It was called Wireless Geolocation Technical Prime. She was given this position when it didn't even have a job description yet. When I interviewed her, she told me that when she would speak about what she was working on 25 years ago, she would say, thanks to these technologies, we will be able to travel to new cities and find our way without asking for directions. You know, it is something we take for granted now, but at the time, everyone looked at her like she had two heads. Today, Dr. Shireen holds 9 patents, 8 of which are directly connected to geolocation and GSM networks. And she is currently chair of the Global Engineering Deans Council. Just a few months ago, here in the UAE, we saw the Minister of State for Advanced Technology, Her Excellency Sara Al Amiri, lead the UAE's Mars Hope orbiter mission into space, making the UAE only the 5th country to reach the red planet and only the 2nd to do it in a maiden flight. Dr. Mariam Matar, founder and chairperson of the UAE Genetic Diseases Association, is recognized as one of the most influential scientists in the region. Sheikha Badur Al-Qasimi this year became only the 2nd woman and the 1st Arab woman to become the president of the International Publishers Association in its 125-year history. I could easily go on and on. The achievements of female leadership in the UAE and the wider Middle East, in fact, are astonishing on a global scale, and yet we could easily be doing so much better. Wherever you go in the world, seeing women in these positions is still the exception, and it's not the norm. There is a massive, untapped potential when it comes to embracing female leadership. There are so many reasons for this. Research has shown that unconscious bias plays a significant role in hiring and promotion decisions, which also contributes to the lower number of women in key positions. Interestingly, Schneider Electric has just announced that 44% of their executive committee, the team responsible for day-to-day management of their company, will be women. This now places them as having one of the most gender-balanced senior management teams amongst the 40 biggest listed companies in France. And that's despite the fact that they operate in a sector that is not typically very balanced. And it wasn't always like that. In 2010, only one of their executive committee members was a woman, and in 2006, they had none at all. So it does show that with serious commitment, change is absolutely possible. Another reason we don't see enough women in leadership has to do with who we think we're supposed to become. Research shows that starting at around the age of 5, girls develop self-limiting beliefs and begin to think that they're not as smart or as capable as boys. 5, the age of 5. They stop believing that their gender can do or be anything. And they carry this into adulthood as something called the unentitled mindset. The reason is the stories that they are being told. These stories shape who they think they need to become in order to be loved and accepted. Boys are encouraged to go out and achieve and to self-actualize, while girls, on the other hand, Well, they're taught that their entire self-worth relies on making other people happy, whether it's their parents, their husband, their children, or wider society. Very few women are encouraged to pursue entrepreneurship or top leadership roles. Even the CEO of the multi-billion-dollar company Spanx, Sarah Blakely, she has spoken about how people felt sorry for her because she wasn't married before the age of 37. And they said, don't worry, you're going to find a husband, it's okay. She says, rarely did anyone ever encourage her to have dreams for herself. And it was, in fact, seeing the limited options that her mother and grandmother had that drove her to become the CEO of her own life instead of looking for a husband. This is why representation of powerful women in every field is so incredibly vital to changing the narrative. We need to flip the script. And now with the coronavirus pandemic, the gap has gotten even wider, with women being disproportionately affected by job loss and burnout as they juggle work with caregiving demands. In 2020 alone, women globally lost more than 64 million jobs, and that's 5% of the total jobs held by women, according to Oxfam International. By comparison, 3.9% of men's jobs were lost last year. This loss of jobs cost women around the world at least $800 billion in earnings, a figure that is more than the GDP of 98 countries combined. It's important to remember that all of these challenges for women are compounded when we talk about women of color. In the case of ethnic and cultural diversity, McKinsey's findings are even more compelling. In 2019, the top quartile of companies outperformed those in the fourth one by 36% in profitability, up from 33%. And their results showed time and time again that the likelihood of outperformance continues to be higher for diversity in ethnicity than for gender. Another reason that the business case for diversity and inclusion is so great is that the more we do to tell our stories and get to know people from different backgrounds, the more we're exposed to different perspectives, to new ideas, new and often better ways of doing things. And this, of course, drives creativity and innovation. However, hiring diverse talent simply isn't enough. It's the workplace experience that shapes whether people will actually remain and feel included and thrive. True diversity and equity and inclusion can only be achieved when we realize that there are two parts to the puzzle. Firstly, we need to make sure that those who are underrepresented are empowered and provided with inclusive platforms and spaces to safely express their ideas and perspectives. This means that we include them at every step of the process, and we really listen to what they have to say and be mindful of things like unconscious bias. Secondly, if you are underrepresented or worse, misrepresented, please step up and tell your story and make sure that your voice is heard. So often, when our voices are historically minimized and suppressed in favor of another, when it comes to asking for what we need or claiming our place and our identity, we are less likely to do so because that has been the status quo. That has been the expectation. And we have to make a trade-off between getting what we need and being safe. Sometimes it will feel too risky or too much work to actually ask for what we need. So we remain on the sidelines. We remain invisible. We surrender our power and we don't realize our full potential, whether it's in life or in work and business. Companies have to make a bold and public commitment to diversity and inclusion and to put into place processes and policies that nurture it. Every individual leader needs to be invested in the value of belonging, deploying empathy to connect and to understand at a deeper level why it in fact is so important in order to more effectively tackle the problem. And while leadership is vital, it cannot just be from the top down. From senior leaders to frontline employees, every individual has to see that they have a powerful role to play in forming company culture. People from diverse backgrounds must be engaged from the beginning and asked what inclusivity looks like for them, as well as identifying differences in employee experience and values across the organization so that change can be made relevant for each person. Lasting change has to activate every part of the system so that it doesn't just become a PR stunt or lip service. From sourcing and recruiting to hiring, onboarding, research and development, campaigns to daily aspects of work, team building, culture, successes and failures, performance reviews, succession planning, mentoring, all of that needs to have that intention of inclusivity behind it. Know, however, that if you do have one person from a certain country or ethnic group in your team, that their experience doesn't necessarily represent the same views and experiences of somebody else from a similar background. Just like you wouldn't expect every Australian to think and have the same views, it would be erroneous to think that all Muslims think and believe the same thing. Encourage opportunities to explore unique views. In meetings and seminars, who's invited? Who gets to speak? Do you have a variety of perspectives? Are you leaving out anyone whose input would be really valuable? If you're not creating the conditions where every person can contribute in a meaningful way, you need to have the courage to admit it and work on changing that. And there might be a healthy dose of tension too, as team members might disagree, but it needs to be made into an opportunity to learn from each other. Start with stories to move into expanded possibilities. Rather than thinking that everyone needs to fit in order to belong, focus on finding ways for your people to thrive with their unique abilities. And remember, it's not simply one training session that is going to instill diversity, equity, and inclusion into a company culture, but it is ongoing and evolving, and it's a dynamic process. And finally, I really need to say that diversity, equity, and inclusion is unquestionably great for business, but it's vital because it can transform and even save lives. The number of times that someone has reached out and said to me, "Thank you for telling this story. This is me. This has helped me so much out of a dark place. This has helped me embrace who I am." It's astonishing. We all need to feel seen, heard, and valued. And for those who have been vilified and even persecuted for just simply being who they are, that is priceless. Change has only ever happened when there have been those who have been brave enough to stand up and challenge what is accepted and say, things need to be different. We need to do better. Think about how you can create better access and opportunities. What markets are still untapped and neglected? How can you use your story to inspire change and to find the community that is likely also looking for you too? This is the time to take your unique gifts and use them to change the world for the better. And invariably, you will influence and inspire others to do the same. Our power is further magnified when we create spaces for others to be able to do just that. And this is where connection happens and community and belonging emerge and empower. All of these people have inspired millions across the world and across generations. And when I decided to become a journalist and presenter, creating shows that would tell the stories that others weren't telling, I hope to inspire others too. And today, my show reaches a global audience in more than 50 countries. This is the magic of sharing your story, because others will see you doing what they thought that they couldn't. And then they will say, I can, and I will. This is the power of knowing one another. And so, as you embark on this innovation challenge, I'm so excited to see the solutions that you're going to be presenting. And I want you to show the world, who do you think you are? Thank you so much.
That was a really wonderful brief of all the things combined in one session. Does anybody have questions? Like, you can raise your hand or just drop numbers, or can directly just ask a question on the chat box. Oh, we already have one. Thank you so much, Sally. Your topic is empowering, but it also challenges me as a woman. How can I inspire more young girls in my community that they do more and they can do more, and there is so much to explore?
It depends, what community you're in, or where your space is. I'm not sure what you do or what your vision is, but there are so many different ways that you can do this. And I love the question. Thank you for that question. um, there are so many different ways to engage young women these days. Social media is a fantastic way of engaging young people now. There are endless possibilities for community now. There are so many different ways to reach anybody who you want to bring on board, who you see as needing community. And here's the thing: if you feel like you need a community, then it's likely that you're going to find other people around you who need that too. So go ahead and find them. But I would say definitely, first up, as I was saying, tell your story, use your voice, talk about what's really important to you, because it's likely that when you share that, particularly on social media, somebody else is going to connect with that. It's going to resonate, and they're going to say, yes, me too. Oh my God, I was thinking the same thing. I was feeling the same thing. That is so incredibly powerful. And the thing about building community is that it takes time as well. So sometimes we can feel like we've put out a post, or we've, done this blog post or something like that, and we feel like, well, nothing came back, or not many people came back. Many of those who have built communities of millions across the world will tell you that it takes months, it takes sometimes years as well. Gary Vaynerchuk is a fantastic example of that. For example, he has spent years, and he talks about this, he has spent years creating the incredible community of millions that follows him now and listens to everything that he has to say. This is something that does take time, but is so incredibly rewarding. And as you connect with one person, and two, and three, and more, and 20, and 100, and then thousands, it will only build, because those people will then tell others. And then you can all grow together and invite others to contribute as well, their own stories. Invite others to be part of that by engaging them as well. Building community is about engagement, by asking others to come forth with what's important to them. What are their stories? How did they want to see that community grow? And then it just will continue.
Yeah. So can Navonil, could you just unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Sally. It was a really awesome space. Really beautiful. I just have a small question for you. the question is basically we're talking about inclusion and diversity, right? So like there are many countries in which the stories, the thing is which the majority of the stories I find like this inspiring stories like you are in like English, right? You speak the language English. There are many, this the linguistic barrier is there in which like many regional women and underprivileged represented underrepresented communities who do not have the access to this stories like yours and many others. So what do you think would be the possible solution to that, or like have you witnessed something like this before in any other countries, or have come up with some solution? This just the language barrier which the community faces, and they do not have this inspiration or role model to follow and tell their stories. Yeah.
So do you mean, like, I think I'm trying to understand your question. So are you talking about maybe inspirational speakers, speaking in English and not reaching other people? Is that what you mean, or in what way?
Yeah, I mean, so there are many local, like regional languages which are being followed in India, right? I'm taking an example of India. This might be the case across the globe. So yeah, so I'm from listed West Bengal, which is in India, and majority of those people here, like the village or the underdeveloped regions, mainly speak the regional language here. So they do not like have the access, or they do not comprehend the English language, right? So that becomes like a major that becomes a major challenge for them to get hold of the experience or the stories which might inspire them. I mean, the things you face, they might face them too, but they do not understand, okay, this is the thing she is talking about, and this is some way which I can tell my story
Right.
as well, and I can improve as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
like,
feel
is
you.
there?
Yeah, I feel you for sure. And this is a really great question. So thank you for asking it. But what I would say to that is, if you have knowledge of a specific language that you know that is not being served in a specific area, and you want to make it more accessible, then if it really matters to you, create resources, be that person that translates the stuff into the language that you are seeing not being served, or employ partnerships where people are doing that, because the impact that you're going to have is massive, and it's going to be huge, and it can only grow. And you're absolutely right, there are definitely people around the world who don't have access, possibly, to this kind of education and these kind of experiences. And I think this is part of our purpose, for maybe you, or for people that I can see a business opportunity there, in terms of this is what I'm talking about. There's an untapped market there. There is an untapped, unserved need that is absolutely brilliant. Go for it. If you can see that area, go for it. Create something amazing, and bring that knowledge to those that you are seeing underserved. The only way that I can see it kind of, going back the other way is, for those who speak other languages, maybe to learn English as well. But I'm very mindful of that, knowing that resources might be difficult. So, again, that's another opportunity to create something where there's education. So educational opportunities are so important for us to think about, where are they not being provided, and to go ahead and do that. When I say I'm being mindful about, telling somebody else to learn English, English is probably the most important language today. But for me, as an Arab Australian who grew up, in Australia, and my English is far better than my Arabic, I can tell you, it's really important for me, that each of us, keep our original mother tongue and languages. And, we only add to that. We don't, discard our mother tongue, in favor of English, and just kind of, go in that direction. So I think, there are so many different opportunities, and I want to thank you for that amazing question.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally. Yeah.
I'll take the last question. Sampath, could you unmute and ask your question?
Thank you. It was a wonderful session, Sally. And the question that I have is, uh, like I come from a place, India, where there are a lot of languages, cultures, and if you just travel 100 kilometers from the place you live, you see the differences in people, and despite everything. And historically, like there is a system that we are following in our country, that is reservation to have that representation right after the independence. So I have seen this growing trend that having these uh, particular systems in place for maintaining representation has created some boundaries within people. Uh, their the intention is good, is that everybody in the community and in the country should have representation, but it is turning out to be something different. Day by day, the communities here are becoming more polarized, and that has been like a small trend all over the globe, as I see it from the past 4 or 5 years, because we have seen the rise of hate crimes like in the past 5 to 6 years. And the question that comes to me is, a lot of people are talking about this than ever before. They're raising their voices. What is going wrong? Which is, taking back the progress instead of the inclusion. So this is a question that has been hitting me for a long time now. Like, can you throw a light, according to you, what is leading to this?
That is an excellent question, Sampath. And to say, yes, we need to be holding on to who we are and our identities, but at the same time, it's what I was talking about before, that we need to start with that intention, that we need to be open to each other. We need to start with the intention of unity. And, the funny thing is, the first radio program that I ever did was called Unity in the Community, right? Because that was the focus, because, that was a moment where hate crimes were rampant, and right now there is still so much division. You're absolutely right. There is a lot of division, but we're going in from a place of fear. We're going in from a place of, there aren't enough resources for everybody, so I'm going to bring other people down, and that kind of mindset. Unfortunately, the answer to this is that it's up to each of us to demand that, yes, we cherish who we are and we hold that dear to ourselves, but we also need to realize that we're incredibly interconnected. We all come from the same place. We all have the same needs. When we talk to each other, we all, feel the same way about things. And it is actually so much more similar than it is different. And if the coronavirus pandemic didn't teach us anything else, it sure taught us that we are very interconnected and we need to take care of each other. Otherwise, we're all gone. We are all gone. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, all of these petty differences, political differences, and all of that will not matter, because if we do not come together, then this is going to affect all of us. The challenges that we're facing in the 21st century cannot be met, cannot be solved unless we come together. So we have to find ways of bridging the divide. We have to find ways of talking to each other, from governments all the way down to you and me, everyday people. We have to find ways of bridging that gap, of creating unity, of finding common causes. There will always be something in common if we just look for it. And there will always be something that is different that will divide us if that is what we are looking for. So it all starts with the intention. And this is absolutely vital. Literally, I love your question because our lives depend on it. our ability to solve COVID-19, climate change, racial and social injustice, all of that relies on us coming together in order for us to solve those challenges. So this is the only way to do it, and it's not going to happen overnight, but we have to start somewhere, and we have to go in with that intention every day, all the time, and think about ways that, and I hope that this will be part of your challenge, ways of bringing us together in order to solve problems. It's absolutely vital, and our lives depend on it. So thank you for that, Sampath.
Thanks for the answer.
So thank you, Sampath, for your question. Thank you, Sally, for taking all the questions and answering them with such a great, I'll say great. There's no great answer, but a unique way is always there. And I really enjoyed this whole session. And thank you, first of all, for coming here. And for the delegates, the link has been sent on the Telegram room. You need to join back to the same room, and we'll continue with the next agenda. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you so much. Thank you.